Welcome to the Generous Benefits Podcast, where we help employers create meaningful benefits that make a real impact. I'm your host, Amanda Brummitt. Today, we're diving into one of the most overlooked but absolutely critical pieces of the employee benefits experience. What happens when someone leaves your company? Whether it's a resignation, a layoff, or a retirement, the transition process can be confusing, emotional, and legally complex. That's where today's guest comes in. I'm joined by Topher Reynoso, founder of Kept, a company laser-focused on making post-employment smoother, simpler, and more supportive for both employers and employees. From COBRA to compliance to communication, Topher rethinks how we handle the offboarding experience and helping employers turn what used to be a liability into a moment of clarity and care. Well, Topher, thank you so much for being here. If you could start out by just telling us about yourself.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. Just a little bit of background. I am technically an attorney, but I like to say that I try not to be as much as possible. Instead, I like actually building things rather than tearing things apart. And building things to me is really focused in the health and benefits space. For pretty much my whole career, it's where I've been dedicated. In the past, built a compliance startup that focused when the ACA was rolling out on helping small and medium-sized businesses navigate the ACA requirements. There was a lot of swirl. The media, you might remember, doing a lot of work to scare everybody of what was going on with everything. And so that created a lot of mental load for especially the small and medium employers. Were like, they don't have the big HR teams. They don't have a ton of resources to tackle that stuff. So that's where I've really enjoyed working, is in the space for helping employers, brokers, folks just navigate a really complex industry that I think could use a lot more clarity. And so my products, my building focus has been on providing that clarity for folks.
Yeah. Okay. You don't have to apologize by being an attorney on this show. I love attorneys. You keep us out of trouble.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. We need good attorneys, and there are good attorneys. It just wasn't quite the life that I was looking for. I wanted to go a more non-traditional route, and getting to leverage that legal knowledge to turn it into something useful every day for lots of people. That was what I got really passionate about, building those products to help people not have to be attorneys and not have to be experts in order to navigate it. That's what I think is really cool.
Yeah, definitely. And then how did you take all that and decide, like, the worst day of most people's life, I want to be the guy. I want to be the one managing that.
Yeah, I think, COBRA, offboarding, they're not like super, like nobody, I'm not the life at any party talking about my COBRA experience, right? But to me, it's actually really fun. I enjoy every minute of it because what I'm actually passionate about is helping people make better decisions in the health
Mhm.
industry. And sort of what I identified while I was working at another brokerage um, was that most of the COBRA solutions think of it more as a checkbox. And I feel like employers are then sort of trained to think of it as a compliance checkbox. And once you tick that box, you're all done. And that's it. You sent out the notice that you needed to send, and there's nothing else that you have to think about. But what really got me excited about this topic was the idea that there was a time and place where COBRA was absolutely essential. Like, it may have been the only option available for somebody to still have coverage, to keep their family covered and safe.
Mhm.
And that has changed over the decades for sure. And so what I sort of recognized and got excited, passionate about was people don't really have a good opportunity in that COBRA moment to line up those options side by side. We have these great programs, arguably, right? Medicaid, Medicare, the marketplace, premium tax credits to help folks when they're, not the low income enough to qualify for Medicaid, but low enough that, they need help affording healthcare these days. And so those folks, I just felt like were falling through the cracks in this moment, unless you had another job immediately lined up, or you had a big fat bank account with enough savings to pay for COBRA for the next 3, 4 months, however long it takes you to get coverage again, people were going without coverage. And so I thought, well, shoot, we can do better than that. Like, what if we actually help people understand what they need? And so to me, COBRA was sort of the thing that helped us know when to help people. And so that's why I got passionate about it. I think solving COBRA the right way actually means supporting people in what's often a very disruptive moment in their lives.
Definitely. Okay, so let's start with what is COBRA? And I should have warned you about this. I'm an anti-acronym person. I feel like acronyms are we just have too many of them in healthcare. So
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
assume COBRA is an acronym.
It is. It's the Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act,
Look at you.
which
Okay, I was prepared to edit that if you didn't know.
no need. I have gone deep
Because you're an
on these
attorney. Of course
regulations.
you
I have
know.
gone deep on these laws. And yeah, COBRA is not an acronym that even makes a whole lot of sense. Like, that name doesn't describe at all what it does.
Mhm.
And so when we say COBRA, that's actually, there's a lot of stuff that was passed in this Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. But when we say COBRA colloquially, folks really think of the insurance that happens after you leave an employer. And so
Mhm.
that's what we really attach to. That's what we think about when we say that acronym. And so I'm not going to do this acronym is actually kind of helpful. I'm not going to say that full one the entire
Yes,
podcast
please.
because I think it's better for us actually to say COBRA in this instance. But yeah, let's make sure that we all understand, what it is, where did it come from? And part of it, back in the late 80s, early 90s, it was about helping people figure out how to navigate post employment. So this was before, you could lose your health coverage. And if you had pre-existing conditions, now when you walked back out into the insurance marketplace, you could be denied coverage for those things. So if you had a surgery scheduled 2 months after you got terminated, suddenly you just had the rug ripped out right from under you. And so this whole thing, it was actually very bipartisan, you know, came together and everyone was like, this is a problem. We should definitely provide a path forward for folks to still be able to be covered. And so at that time, it was very impactful. It was very meaningful for folks who were departing. There weren't a whole lot of other options for pre-existing conditions. And so that's where, this idea of COBRA came from. And I think it's sort of taken on some different connotations since that time, 2000s, 10s, and now the 20s. We're seeing very different iterations and usages for it. But that is what COBRA is. It's you being able to continue on the same plan that you had while you worked for your employer. Some people think it's a government program or government insurance that's really expensive or something along those lines. And it's not. It's literally just you get to stay on the same plan that you had while you were at your employer. Same deductibles, whatever you'd paid for the deductible that year, that all carries over. It's like you never left the employer in terms of your benefits.
Yeah. And can you clear up the misconception on why people think it's expensive? For my friends that are fully employed somewhere and have benefits, I want to slap them when they
Yeah,
say how
I
expensive it
know.
is.
I know. Well, it's funny because I think that impression comes mostly because people don't understand how their employers are contributing to their own health insurance while they're employed.
Yeah.
And so what you're seeing in that COBRA price, it's not actually a new price at all. It may look new to you because maybe your employer is paying 100% for you, which is terrific. Thanks. That's
Mhm.
great of your employer to cover that for you. But they may cover anywhere from 50% to 100%. And so the amount that you were paying was much, much lower while you're an employee. So sometimes people get shocked because they think, hey, I was only paying $100 per paycheck for this. Why all of a sudden is it $800 for me to pay for my monthly premium? And that's where it's what you're actually missing is that in COBRA, you are paying 100% of the cost. So this is exactly how much it costs while you were employed. It's just your employer was footing a big chunk of that bill and you were footing a smaller chunk of that bill. But now you have to pay both of those combined. You're paying the employer's share and you're paying the employee share, your share. And so that's where you get the impression of, oh my gosh, this is so expensive. I just lost my job. There's no way I can afford to continue on this plan. And to be honest, employer benefits tend to be pretty rich, sometimes
Yeah.
richer than what you see out on the marketplace. And so for some folks, it might be a better option for them during a time that budgets are tight to go explore another option. Maybe COBRA, with the richer benefits that you had, with the broader networks that you had at your employer, maybe it doesn't meet your needs at that moment any longer. But you do always still have that right to continue on it because of COBRA.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. And so now that we know COBRA isn't expensive, health insurance is just expensive.
Yes,
What are,
exactly.
on the employer side, what are things that they get wrong about COBRA administration and things that they could do better? And you talk about compassion a lot. How can they
Yeah.
make this a less crappy experience for people?
Yeah, I think that's a great description of it. Nobody's going to be happy that they were terminated. Nobody's going to be happy in that. Maybe they're leaving voluntarily, so then
Sure.
it's a little happier. You've got something lined up. You've got benefits at that new job starting next month, so it's not a big deal. But a lot of people don't have that luxury. A lot of people are spending months between one job and the next. And so it can be tough in that moment to figure out, shoot, what am I going to do? And that exasperation, that worry is something that I think is very palpable to a lot of folks. Obviously, the first concern when people leave a job is finance. How am I going to make my
Sure.
rent? How am I going to make my mortgage payment? But the very next, and sometimes if there are a lot of health issues in the household, even the bigger issue may be, what are we going to do about health insurance?
Right.
I have examples of people who their children had expensive prescriptions and suddenly they lose their job and they don't know what they're going to do. How are they going to afford these prescriptions? And so I think one of the things that the employer can do is just remember that this is very personal on many levels for
Mhm.
individuals. And so that's why we talk a lot about compassion and supportive, and helping people understand their options goes a long way in that. But it's tough because employers, especially HR teams, they're not exactly flush with resources. Sometimes they're very understaffed and maybe don't have a lot of tools. Maybe they're not experts in the individual marketplace or Medicare or Medicaid. And so they don't feel like they can provide that level of detailed support to individuals. But even just recognizing with folks that this is a hard moment and a hard thing to process, and giving them resources to ask questions, that could be really difficult for some HR teams, but just giving them the space to do that can be really meaningful. Now, obviously, don't step in it and start giving advice and saying things that you don't know what you're talking about. You can get into trouble really fast that way.
Right.
But treating people like they're people in that moment. Sometimes businesses have to make hard decisions. You have to decide to let folks go for the good of the business. You have to decide, hey, we've got to lower our burn if we're going to survive. I get that. That happens. And I think most people will understand that once they sort of step away from the situation a little bit further. But it's really hard to do that when you're in that moment. It feels very, very personal. And so I think one of the things that employers can do is just recognize how personal this is. And it's awkward because for HR people, they're the ones who have to sit across from these folks and give the bad news and answer the questions. And that is emotionally can really put a toll on the HR folks. I think sometimes people don't think about how hard this is for HR as well to sit and do these conversations. But I think one of, like I'm saying, compassion. Be be understanding and be willing to recognize with this person that this is not an easy thing. And they may have additional concerns. And technically, the COBRA document has information about the marketplace in it. You're required to include this stuff.
Oh,
Many people
really?
don't know this. 'Cause it's like two paragraphs in like a 14, 15-page legalese filled document. And so that's one of the things that I think people really sort of miss, is that throwing that legalese, that jargon at folks doesn't make them feel supported. It doesn't recognize the humanity in this moment. You're just checking off the box. So think of ways that you can check the box, stay safe legally, but also give people the space to recognize that this is going to feel very personal. And for us, we don't want you to feel like we personally don't like you or don't want you here, but we do need you to understand we know that this is going to affect you on a very personal level. At home, you may have health concerns that I don't know about as the employer. Many employers shouldn't know about that stuff,
Yeah.
but it's important for you to keep it in mind if you have prescriptions, if you have surgeries. COBRA's available to help you navigate those things. Let's figure out what we can do to make sure that you feel like you have a path forward. We don't want you to feel like my family's doomed because I lost my job.
Yeah. And is that a conversation that you almost want to have scripted?
I think it's worth having a script that
Hmm.
the HR folks are trained on. They're
Hmm.
well versed in so that they understand where the limits are of what they could say and what they shouldn't say.
Right.
But you also need like people know when you're robotically reading
Oh,
something. They
yeah.
know they can feel that type of impact. What I often recommend is put together a really nice offboarding document. Like put something together that if that COBRA document, if you've ever read this thing, it is not helpful to a lot of the questions that people have in that moment. It checks all the boxes of what legally people need in order to sign up for COBRA or what legislators think people need to hear to understand COBRA. But the layman doesn't understand all of these terms. You need to sit down with an attorney to have someone translate this thing. That doesn't mean don't do the notice.
Yeah.
100% do the notice. You must do the notice. And
Do the
some of
notice.
the yes, don't not do the notice just because you think it's a lot of legalese jargon. No, you have to do that part. But it's also good to recognize that like, hey, there's probably a more human way to engage folks on the conversation of what COBRA is. Even a paragraph explanation of this in the document can go a long way. We found that over 72% of people don't even know the very basic concept of what COBRA is, which is what you and I have been discussing, where they think it's this government program or something.
Hmm.
So even a one pager that tells them, we recognize that you'll be losing your health insurance. Here's an option, COBRA. There are other options you could explore. Just giving them that information alone could be enough for somebody to breathe a little bit easier and know, okay, I've got a week to figure out my finances. I'm going to tackle this health thing the week after. Let me get the job hunt going first. So take the time, be thoughtful about it. And yes, you can write a script, you can put together that one pager to save your team time, but be thoughtful about it ahead of time. And then if they're trained well enough, be willing to adapt a bit. Like if they tell you, hey, I've got a surgery next week, or I've got a surgery next month, what am I supposed to do about that? Be trained to say, well, COBRA is a great option if that's, your top concern right now. Here's the documentation for it. Reach out to our administrator if you have any questions. Um, be willing to adjust based on the situation.
Yeah, definitely. And then, so my role job is in healthcare consulting, and it's pretty clear in all of the malpractice data that if you're kind, if you're empathetic, basically if your patient likes you, you are less likely to get sued.
Yep.
Does that translate to
Yeah.
offboarding situations?
Definitely. What we find is in those antagonistic moments, when you treat people like they are a number, they are far more likely to result in Department of Labor is actually the highest spike that we see,
Oh,
where unemployment claims that are inappropriate or ineligible happen. Those types of things are a lot more common as a result of an unexpected and cold departure for somebody. And so a lot of people think like, oh, the big lawsuit. It's actually not like this is death by a thousand cuts more than anything else. If all of a sudden your
yeah.
HR is having to face 100 ineligible unemployment claims, you're going to spend days sifting through this and helping the Department of Labor understand whether or not these are eligible. Um, that can be a lot of burden for your folks. And so that's where that compassionate approach, recognizing sort of the humanity in it and helping people understand their options goes a long way in minimizing it. You also should think about your alumni base as a future hiring base as well in two ways. We're
Yeah.
seeing a lot of boomeranging employees. Folks come back, they go out, they get experience elsewhere, and they come
Hmm.
back better for it. They bring new perspectives, they bring new things to your organization. So we've seen an increase post COVID on boomeranging employees. And then the second thing, if I go on LinkedIn and I'm thinking about a job, I'm going to take a look at that company and who do I know in my network who's works there or works there today.
Oh,
And if
yeah.
I reach out and that person tells me, oh my gosh, they laid me off. They're absolutely horrible. They didn't support me at all. I felt like they just gave me the boot and there was no support whatsoever. That has an impact on your hiring ability. Like that reputation follows you. So even just providing that more human approach to it definitely impacts liability as well as your brand and your ability to hire in the future. So across the board, it could only be better for you to think about this aspect of the life cycle of an employee and be deliberate about it. A lot of people think about hiring. A lot of people invest resources on that side, but they forget about this last part because they just think, well, I'm not going to invest in them. They're not my employee, but they could be again. And they very well may be out there talking about you. And so you want to make good impressions here. Don't burn those bridges.
Yeah, most definitely. Okay, last thing on mistakes. Do you find employers that just don't give people that terrible, long, awful form and mention COBRA at all?
Yeah, definitely. And one of the biggest like liabilities, what we see in some of the big COBRA suits is actually employers who stray from the model notice. They start
Mm,
putting their own wording into it. They start doing something different. They start steering people away from COBRA or making it deliberately difficult for people to get into COBRA. Don't bother with that. Like if you're worried about COBRA participants, because they tend to be high utilizers, if you're paying that much for insurance, because you need it usually, um, there are better ways to help minimize that without running afoul of that
yeah,
and without just feeling gross in that. Like you don't want people to feel like they've been taken advantage of. So my suggestion is use the model notice, use a administrator who follows the model notice, then use those other things that I was talking about, the conversations, the one pager, use that type of stuff to bring the human element to it. Don't try to shove this into the notice. Like I said, it's a lot of legalese. You need to follow it. It's important that you do it, but find other ways to engage folks in that conversation. You can help them actually a lot and help yourself in minimizing COBRA utilization if you actually help them understand those other options just by pointing them to healthcare.gov, just by pointing them towards Medicaid or Medicare. You don't even have to do any work on qualifying them for it. But if you just have that script or have that one pager that sends them to those places to see their options, we see up to a 35% decrease in COBRA enrollment when you actually make it easy for folks to see other options, which makes sense. Once you
yeah.
see those other options, you know a path. Of course, you're only going to see a decrease. You're not going to see an increase in COBRA enrollment. You're going to see a decrease. So focus on those other ways. Don't make those boneheaded mistakes that we've seen some big companies make in trying to control those things.
Okay, that's great advice. So I can tell you're a positive person because weaved through what we're not supposed to do. You've shared a lot of what we should do. Are there other pearls that you can give us that would make that offboarding experience great?
You know, I just think a lot of this has to do with the attitude of the team that delivers this messaging as well. Um, Obviously, resources make a difference for folks. If you can afford to bring in a good COBRA administrator who thinks about these things and is a partner with you in it, um, be thoughtful about it because a lot of them out there are just going to, like I said, throw that document out and check the box, and that's the end of it. But be discerning, ask questions, ask how they're going to help you in that tough moment with letting people go. What are they going to do to provide you support in that moment? Because, like I said earlier, a lot of times, especially small, medium sized companies, don't have the resources to spend on a big HR team that's going to solve these problems for them. So look for ways to bundle this or include it in the products that you're already paying for that you have to have. Um, And that's where, I feel like you can find an easy win in those if you find the right partners to work with. Maybe another little pearl, get really good at the exit interview. A lot
Mm.
of folks miss this and they
Hmm.
just shoot an email out or have a quick conversation. Hey, sorry, Val, let you go. You'll get stuff in the mail. See ya. Um, that's a huge missed opportunity. Feedback is a gift. And I know it can be tough in that moment to think of that as an employer. And you're probably going to get some very honest feedback that you may have never received otherwise. But that is a gift. Like you
Yep.
should listen to the employees on what their issues are. Now, you may do some digging and find out that, okay, there isn't so much legitimacy to this concern, but it's still worth engaging in that conversation because you can find a lot of blind spots in your company that could become much bigger problems later on. If you hear feedback from multiple folks departing that a certain manager is just, I can't work with him. The way that he manages or the way that she talks to people or the way that they set expectations or don't set expectations is setting people up for failure. If you hear that multiple times, you've got something you need to go dig into, find out what's happening because you're going to be losing more folks as a result of this. So get good at asking those questions at the exit interview. Think of offboarding as a data opportunity, but also think of it as an opportunity to show your humanity and your branding and that specific take of how you treat people. It's an important part, like I said, of the life cycle that I think is also the most overlooked.
Yes, absolutely. So, as you're going through that process, is there any specific documentation or best practices so that if you do get that Department of Labor call or Workforce Commission comes after you, that it's going to be clear that you did everything you should?
Yeah, for the COBRA, it should be pretty straightforward. It's something like 98% of companies in the US have an administrator.
Oh,
So
nice.
your administrator should be handling the details of when did we send out this notice? Where did we send it to? When were the dates? Did we meet the deadlines and the timelines that were required there? If you're trying to do it on your own, that's where things can get difficult to show that audit trail unless you are very, very deliberate about this process and have done your research on it. So make sure you are capturing that information. Figure out, what are the triggering events that I need to send these notices? What is the content of the notice? Where do I need to send it? How do I need to send it? Certified mail or are you following the electronic delivery requirements, which are pretty tough. ERISA has electronic delivery regulations, so you can do it electronically, but you really need to understand those regulations and what's required of you in order to do this electronically. And a lot of it comes down to consent and tracking that people actually receive these things. So there's the potential for going astray here if you don't know what you're doing, which is why it's good to have an administrator who's well versed in this and can navigate it for you. Um, but yeah, those are some of the things I would be mindful of as you're navigating the minefield. But I would say as an HR team, as a company, focus more on the exit interview, focus on the compassionate side. Let the administrator, let those folks handle the check boxes and the paper trail that you need to show the Department of Labor that you're doing what you're required to do. But then on top of that, your unemployment claims that you end up having to fight if they're ineligible, somebody left voluntarily, but now they're filing for unemployment or something along those lines. Make sure that you keep some good documentation on why people are leaving as well. Take notes, keep those written, ask the employee to send a formal email or letter explaining, they're leaving the company. Why would also be a really good reason to have on there. That gives you something that you can go back to the Department of Labor with to show, hey, here's evidence. I have something written. You're not just relying on my word versus their word. They said that they were leaving because they had another job lined up, but the employee says you told them if they didn't make XYZ change, they were fired, and they didn't feel they could make that change, so you fired them.
Mhm.
Those types of situations can get argumentative, can get adversarial really quickly. So that's where it's documentation, get stuff in writing, make sure everybody's on the same page as people depart. And if you're good to those people and you're compassionate, you're thoughtful, you're far more likely to get that type of documentation out of them. People are a lot more likely to tell you the reasons and provide you the documentation you need to avoid those pitfalls.
Nice. Well, and since you happen to be an attorney, in those situations, does intent matter within the law if you intended to do things right?
I mean, it definitely goes a long way if it shows that you have been totally mishandling this or not caring about it or not thoughtful about it. That definitely, I mean, even punitive damages come in at
Mhm.
times for folks where it's just egregious. You just were not even caring about any of these requirements the entire way. Yes, that can absolutely impact not only the decision, the outcome, but also the result of that. What type of fines, what type of payments are you making as a result of this? In general, being thoughtful, trying to understand, making good decisions, and trying your best to provide what's required of you is going to work out better for you. Obviously, not
In
telling you
life.
anything new there. Yeah, doing the right thing is always going to be better for you in the long run. So it's that can be tough for folks in the moment sometimes. But as a general policy, that's how you're going to avoid these big pitfalls. That's how you're going to avoid the big lawsuits that we see employers run into in this realm of the health insurance industry.
Yeah. Okay. One last question. If you could pick
Yeah.
just one thing for employers to do this year to improve their post employment process, what would it be?
Um, the one thing I would recommend doing is definitely figure out that one pager. Figure out that offboarding document, tailor it to your workforce. And I would maybe send it, I know it might be annoying to hear this, but maybe send it over to an attorney, an
Oh,
employment law attorney, have them just look over it once, make sure that they're like, yes, you're not opening any liability for yourself, but you're also providing really meaningful, supportive, thoughtful information without the big old legalese document that doesn't help people. I think that's actually one of the biggest things that you can do. When people have something that they can walk away with, read, digest, it may take them a week to come back to it, but if they have that, they've got a place to ask questions or a place to reach out for more information. It goes a long way in making people feel supported. Spend the time to do it. It's worth it.
perfect. And I want to reiterate, you said an employment law attorney, not your neighbor that does
Yeah,
divorces, not
that's
like
right.
an employment
That's
law attorney.
exactly. You want somebody who either has been on the employer side or the employee's side of lawsuits related to their employment. You want somebody who really knows and understands because this is a go-to for a lot of people. If you don't properly offer COBRA, it's one of the things that the employment law attorney was going to ask this employee who was wrongfully terminated. Hey, did you get did you get a COBRA notice? Did you get this offering? Did you get that? They're going to go down the list of everything that they should have received to make sure that their client is being properly represented. And so this is one of the things you want to get somebody who's used to that flow, asking those questions, answering those on behalf of a company and making sure that you're actually covered with whatever you're providing to folks.
Excellent. Well, Topher, thank you for your time and thank you for taking such a complicated period in people's life and making it full of empathy, kindness. I can see why Kept is the chosen partner for Brett and Generous Benefits because it aligns with both our brains but also our hearts for treating people like people. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do so and really excited to be providing that solution for folks and helping people navigate that tough time and also making it easier for HR and brokers to navigate as well.
That's a wrap on this episode of Generous Benefits Podcast. A huge thank you to Topher Reynoso for sharing his insights and making the post-employment experience more human, more compliant, and more clear.